You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 554, where tonight we're going to break down Bug, a short story from the Tales from Stories of Light and Dark. It's a book that came out a few years ago. We're going to give you all the details, but we felt this story was relevant given that we just wrapped up Tales of the Empire. How those two are connected, or maybe not how those two are connected, will be determined here in just a minute, along with my co-host tonight, which is Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show. How's it going tonight?
It's going good. Speaking of Tales of the Empire, I just finished my second watch through of that today, which I've got some emotions still.
Okay, well, at any point, if you feel like you just have to sort those out on the show, feel free to do it. This is a safe space, and no one's watching, so
Right.
thank you. Yeah, this is going to be fun. You and I have been talking about covering this short story for some time now. And we didn't get a chance to get it in during the Ahsoka series. And then when they announced Tales of the Empire, and suddenly Morgan Elsbeth was one of the primary characters they were going to be telling stories about, we were like, okay, we got to get it in now. So we're here, and should be a lot of fun. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you first off to all of our Patreon members. And so if you guys are interested in Patreon, you can head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon. Sign up there for $2 on up. And you can get all kinds of back catalog store videos and audios and everything else that we've done over the years, many, many years now here. But special thank you to our now part of the tribe members, which are Danny, Rob, Mike, Borda, Lauren, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman Dan, Isabella, Daz, Uncle Leon, Josh C., Jacob, and Rita Reborn. And also to our Delusions of Grandeur members, which are Rod, CJ, Alex, Steve, and Das. And on top of that, we have a new $10 member, now part of the tribe member, and that is Rafael Rodriguez. So thank you so much for joining at that tier. Hope you enjoy all the content here. And don't forget, for the Patreon members, all of our Patreon members, whenever we do From a Certain Point of View Factboy shows, you guys have the opportunity to come on air and be a part of the show. So look for those. We've got more coming up here very soon, and should be a lot of fun. So quickly on the programming notes, if this is your first time joining us, if you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, comment here while we're live, comment after we're done with the show as well. We'll try to get back to those comments and answer what we can just to interact. We would appreciate the feedback, all positive, of course, if you got it. And but yeah, if you're interested, please go to cantinacast.com/YouTube if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any episodes if they come out. And I think the last thing I want to do before we dive into this is just kind of plug what we got coming up here very shortly. So on top of, let's see, we've got tomorrow, we are going to do the first breakdown of Tales of the Jedi, which will be Morgan Elsbeth. Surprise. That'll be Jonesy and I tomorrow night. And then Saturday, we're going to come back because Sunday's Mother's Day. We normally record on Sundays, but we're going to come back on Saturday night, and we'll break down Tales of the Empire, the Barriss Offee stories. And then afterwards, Jonesy and I will do a Patreon exclusive episode doing the Phantom Menace 25 years later. So it's a tradition here for us to come back a year later, 5 years later, whatever the case may be, for television and movies or whatever we want to talk about, and just reflect on how things have, aged and what's still relevant, and what, how do we look at it now that we've had all this additional Star Wars content over the years. We're going to do that through the lens of the Phantom Menace on Saturday. That'll be at 10 p.m. Central for Patreon members. Okay, with all that said, let's talk about this book. So I guess let me start with, what are your first impressions of the book, or the short story? We've read it, of course, a number of times a while ago, but now that Tales of the Empire, without getting so much in the Tales of the Empire stuff, how was the rereading of this for you, Lauren?
Well, it's funny that you said without getting too much into Tales of the Empire, because immediately upon rereading this, I was trying to shoehorn this, trying to make it fit the way that I wanted it to fit. And then I had to be like, okay, stop, just read the story.
Right.
But it's a really interesting read, just thinking about The kind of like the aftermath of what happened on Dathomir, we do get into that a little bit in this story, which is kind of a cool aspect because that's not really something that you hear a lot about. You just hear about the destruction. You don't really hear about the immediate following
Yeah.
a ton. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the reread once I was able to kind of turn my brain off and stop trying to make Morgan fit in there how I wanted her to.
Yeah, and we'll answer that question at the very end. I mean, I teased it today, and I think we've teased it enough, but we'll get to the answer, I guess, as we see it at the very end of the episode. And the only reason we're doing that is because I want people to kind of listen to the story that's being told here and try to understand how it does or doesn't fit into that. You're right. Kind of a quick recap. So this is again from the Stories of Light and Dark, a book that came out in 2020. And for anybody that's not aware of what this book does, it's very similar to the From a Certain Point of View books that came out for the original trilogy. And it just kind of fills in the gaps of some of the episodes from the Clone Wars. And not a lot. I mean, I think there's only like, 11 stories total in this. And this particular story is it takes place around the same time that the episode Massacre happens from the Clone Wars. And that's when Asajj Ventress goes back to Dathomir. She's already kind of got her tail between her legs. She's not really happy with the Empire, right? Dooku's tried to kill her, and they bring her back in as a sister, and she's kind of reborn for the second time, which of course she does a number of other times later down the road here. But she's kind of reborn, and then immediately after she feels like, oh, I found peace and I found my people, suddenly the Separatist army, along with General Grievous, are at their doorstep. And I'm spoiling the episode now because it's going to be relevant. But in that, there's a massive battle. This is where old Daka summons all the undead, the undead warriors, all the undead for the undead Dathomirian women that are kind of in those pods. And it ends with Daka being killed by Grievous, Asajj being kind of one of the few people that's left alive, but she leaves. She's wounded and she staggers away. And then Mother Talisman is kind of like this ethereal ghost kind of apparition now thing. Never clear whether or not she died or passed or whatever, but it's how it ends. And that is kind of the end of the Night Sisters until, of course, we get to Ahsoka and we start getting into Morgan Elsbeth's story and, what she's trying to do and revenge for what happened on this day. So yeah, all that is, with the character of Morgan Elsbeth. Let me kind of contextualize why there's a link between this story and Morgan Elsbeth. So Anne Coveney is the woman that wrote this story. She is the wife of Dave Filoni. And on a personal level, she's very much into witches. Like, that's kind of her thing. And I think a lot of the influences that we see from witches in Ahsoka series came from Anne, kind of in the ear of Dave Filoni, probably more than anything. So a credit to them for kind of coming up with this and really fleshing this out into a great extent. But this story was written, it's interesting too. Let me say one other thing. When we got the advanced reader copy of this book, it didn't have the bug story in there. Like, they slipped that in. It didn't make it into it. So you got the first 10 stories, wasn't a part of it. It was in the table of contents and it said bug, but when you actually went to page 333, it was not there. So it wasn't until the final release of the book that this story was included. But after reading the story, a number of people, myself included, read this and thought, my gosh, this is, well, it wasn't really to Ahsoka, but when you saw Ahsoka, it was easy to pair the two together because when we're going to get into the kind of the appearance and description of this character Bug, it's similar to Morgan Elsbeth. And there are just things about it where you could easily fit the two together. And knowing that Dave created Morgan Elsbeth and created this Bug character, it does feel like an origin story of sorts. They've never gone out publicly and kind of admitted it or said anything, but that was just a wild rumor for a number of years. Fast forward to Tales of the Empire, I think a couple of wrenches have been thrown in there now. So we'll talk more about that. You want to add anything before we get into the actual story and the structure of the story?
I mean, I think you covered it. And also too, I guess just a little comment is even if, even aside from Morgan Elsbeth, I do feel like this is a really interesting story just on its own, even if you don't know who Bug is. Just kind of like what it's telling us about how the Night Sisters are, how it is on Dathomir. I still feel like that is really interesting in its own right too.
Yeah, it's exactly right. There's a lot of world building that happens in this story in a very short span of pages as well. There's some brand new stuff. There's some callbacks to some old legend stuff when the witches were first introduced, that sort of thing. But All right. Well, the other thing I want to mention about this story is it's kind of broken up into there's basically two timelines. There's the present timeline, and that takes place after the war on Dathomir, and then there's kind of like the past, and that starts with the birth of the beginning of Bug, the birth of a character called Yenna, and that leads all the way up until the battle of the Clone Wars. So we'll kind of jump back and forth here just a little bit, but it's not severe in any way. So, all right, so let's talk about, I guess, who Bug is first. And I guess the first thing why don't you kind of give us maybe the physical description, what we learn about her kind of early on the pages, and set the scene of what planet we're even on at this point.
Yes. So the planet is called, is it Sissy? Am I saying that right?
I think that's how I read it too. Yeah,
Okay.
CD, sorry.
CD. Okay. Man, these planet names kill me.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're on CD, and Bug is, I mean, I don't know what age you thought she was, but to me, I was reading her as like 9 or 10, maybe.
I kind of had at the beginning of the story, I would assume she was kind of like 3 or 4, and then later on, I think there's a jump. I think I was imagining by the time she meets some of the main characters, I think you're right. I think she's probably about age 9ish or 10ish.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, with Bug's story, we do. Yeah, the time that she's, I guess most of the story we're spending, she's about 9 or 10ish is kind of how she reads. But there is a flashback where she's probably 3 or 4.
Exactly.
And she's in a really bad situation. So her parents really don't care about her. They seem like they don't like her. They own this inn on CD, which is, this planet seems like a pretty horrible place. There's not a lot of life there except for the bugs. And so Bug makes friends with the bugs, and that's actually how she gets her nickname, Bug, is she had a pet bug, and one day she was playing with it, and her mom like steps on the bug, and so Bug starts crying. Bug the girl starts crying. And then that's how the nickname sticks, is her mom's like, oh, well, Bug is probably a good name for you, actually.
Yeah, she says, stop that whining. I'll give you something to cry about. All of this over a bug. Huh, come to think of it, that's a better name for you, little bug. I mean, she's like the worst of the worst moms, like worst mother of the year award.
And this is when it sounds like she's probably like 3 or 4. So that just makes it even sadder.
Yeah.
And so she pretty much just is trying to survive in this place. And that's where she's starting off as this character.
Yeah, and she's got gray hair, like silver hair specifically, right? And so you think of Morgan Elsbeth, she's got the silver hair. She's kind of very dirty, very drab. Like you said, this inn is not, it's like, I kind of envisioned it as, really kind of falling apart. I mean, they're on this planetoid of CD. It's not even really a planet. It's a planetoid, tiny little planet. I think at one point they mentioned that it was supposed to be kind of a relay outpost during the war. And they realized that, okay, this really wasn't the best place. And so it just kind of people left, and some people got stuck there and stayed there. And now they live this kind of drab life. So it's she paints a very gloomy kind of picture. And she's got like her parents, which I think are her biological parents. It's never really clearly specified, but those are by the names of Rank is the father, and then Lyra is the mother. Which, by the way, Lyra is now, that's like the 5th time it's been used.
I was thinking the same
Wars.
thing. There's so many Lyras.
There
It's
are
like
a lot
I don't know. I was trying to think of an equivalent, really common female name.
Kira is used a lot in Star Wars.
Yeah.
In Legends and canon, of course, now.
It's just like a super common name. Yeah.
Yeah. Or we've had different variations of it, and there's like 4 variations of Lyra now. Anyway, so they're pretty foul. They beat her, and she's kind of like the Cinderella, right? She's been relegated to just taking care of cleaning the inn the entire time, and her idea of fun, which we'll get into here in just a little bit, but she spends most of her time just cleaning, and she actually goes and cleans to the point of exhaustion, so that when she goes to bed, she doesn't have dreams, right? She has these terrible nightmares, and she just wants to be able to fall asleep, maybe have some time to play, but she wants to just work herself to death so that she can just get up the next day and do it all over again, because she's worried about having bad dreams. So again, it kind of sets that name. It sets up I guess her life as being really miserable. Honestly, it's not a very positive kind of picture here. One thing also that I found was interesting. So this inn has a kind of like a tower that was used for like relaying messages during wartime. and it's like the only tower on the planet. Her dad, Rank, has access to it, and they charge people a ton of money to come in and use this if they want to kind of communicate with anybody else. And so what she's at one point in the book, early on, she actually sees her dad put the number in there into the passcode to get into the door that goes up some stairs that goes to the tower. And then late at night, she would sit there and listen to, whatever was being broadcast across the galaxy. And so for her, this was like her gateway, literally, to what was happening outside of this tiny little planetoid. And she would hear all these messages of, whatever was being discussed. But at one point, she comes across a very significant message that is being transmitted as part of the Clone Wars themselves. And this is kind of where the two tie in. So let me read the message and just kind of I'll give you an opportunity here to kind of talk on that. So she's late at night, she's listening, and she hears this message that says, and it breaks up, so I'll try to do the breakups, but it says, on Mother's instructions, I've placed her in a Class 3 life pod marked, then it breaks up, then it comes back, fought, so I cast a spell of sleep on her, and she may resist when then it breaks up, comes back, estimated travel time from Dathomir is, breaks up, and the next part is, and drop coordinates in the mid-rim are as follow, and then there's a big explosion that she hears, and then it cuts out, right? And so you don't think much of it. Obviously this is something that's going on with Dathomir. Later, just to kind of spoil this, right? Later on, we find out that was sent at the time that Dooku had sent Grievous and the Separatist army to kind of invade Dathomir. So anything you want to add into that part before we move on to the Jarg board that becomes a big role here as well?
Well, and one thing too is that as she's listening to all of these messages, this one from Dathomir, it's kind of just one amongst a sea of stressful messages that she's hearing during the Clone Wars. Like when she first starts listening to them, it's kind of like just normal stuff. And then once the Clone War starts, then they kind of all become similar, like wartime type of messages. So I think when she comes across this Dathomir one, she's just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That sounds
Mm-hmm.
like, and it does say that she's interested in it because she could hear it in the voice that whoever was recording this message was trying to not get caught. But aside from that, that's pretty much the main connection that she has with this message. And then she just seems to move on after
Yeah.
that.
And as kind of point of clarification, so these messages get saved as well. They're kind of being saved there, and this comes up a little bit later in order to be replayed. But the other thing that's kind of interesting, again, about the inn and maybe her kind of day-to-day life before we get into the main story here, because this is all the setup, right? The exposition here. There's a Dejarg board that's in the common area, right? So think of the little holographic chess thing that we see on the Millennium Falcon. We've seen it many places now, but they've got one of those there, and
Not a holographic one.
not the holographic, right?
They
It's
just
old
have the
school,
plain one.
old school, like wooden pieces, physical pieces that people use. And as people would come in and stay at this inn, that was kind of like their pool table or whatever else. And so she would sit there and watch people play this game over and over again. And when they would leave, she would then go back and she would memorize the moves that they went through. And then she would go and reenact the moves that they went through. And through that, she was kind of learning how to play the game. And I guess the most significant thing about this is that one of the pieces is missing, and it's the Monarch piece, which is like this little, and it's a little figure, a little like animal kind of humanoid character that usually has a spear. That piece is missing, and so whenever someone has to use that piece, they use like I don't know, whatever, like a rock or just something like a placeholder, because that board is missing. So that's important. It becomes important. One, it's the only like entertainment that she has outside of the communications relay tower, and it's going to play a role here in just a little bit.
I like how it also shows us that even from childhood, she has like a natural inclination towards strategizing. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really that many kids that are that good at a strategy type of game where they can actually think ahead and study the moves of other people. So it seems like a really special skill that she has.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe we don't necessarily see like the battle tactics per se in either Tales of the Empire or even in Ahsoka, but that I would think that they were doing this the same thing we did with like Omega, right? They kind of set her up as being like this really good strategist when it came to playing games when she was out there with Sid going around and hustling people for money. that did play off in a lot of ways when we saw it by the time we got to season 3 here. But yeah, she foundationally she has that background through playing this game over and over again, and then also like watching people play. Right, it wasn't just her game; she was trying to get in the heads of people and try to understand why they were making the moves that they were moving. So just kind of check the box as far as she's a very strategic kind of person because of this. So, all right. So at this point, oh, sorry, there's a question here. Does this take place before Asajj joins Dooku? Yes. Right now, we are definitely before. Sorry, good question. We're before Asajj joins Dooku. So this is early on. I'd say at this point, we're probably just maybe about a year away at most, maybe months or even weeks. But we're on the cusp of that here. Until we get to the battle itself, right? So the battle is happening now. We're kind of fast forwarding. There's not really a solid timeline here, but at one point, the dad intercepts a call and he hears that there's a war happening on Dathomir. And as part of this call, he's kind of hearing rumors that there's been a lot of bloodshed. So it sounds like the war has just ended. It's not very long after that suddenly there's a passenger barge that comes in and it's carrying people from that region of space. And the barge itself has been kind of it's been not destroyed, but it needs repairs. And so this barge comes and it parks. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think it's his dad that's actually doing the repairs as well. So while people are at this inn, he can actually do repairs on top of that. And a number of the people kind of filter out of the barge and they come and they stay at this inn for, again, an undisclosed kind of amount of time. I'm not really sure exactly how long they're there. But one of the people that comes out is the tie to Dathomir. And it's this long, slender-looking woman. She's dressed all in black. She's very clean from head to toe, whereas, the other people they were kind of described as being, kind of disheveled and kind of grungy and grimy, kind of like, Bug and her family are. But for whatever reason, this woman, because she's a witch, is like spotless, top to bottom. She's got a cat as well, which I thought was really great, a Tuca cat that she calls Iker. And we don't find the name out till a little bit later. But yeah, this woman is kind of like this mysterious character, and she's got like red markings on her temples and her cheeks. So, those kind of telltale signs that she's a Dathomirian witch. She always ate alone. She was never with all the other people. And she was always bugging her dad about getting the hyperdrive. So there's almost kind of like there was a sense of urgency about her. Like she needed to get off planet. She needed to get to wherever she was going. And she was getting really kind of tired. And there's a couple of instances where in this story where she's going to her dad and being like, what's taking so long? How much longer before we can get out of here? I got to go kind of thing. And it all came back to the hyperdrive, right? There was some stuff that needed to get fixed around the hyperdrive. There was, I guess, one more thing about her that was kind of revealed early on is she was trying to get into the communications relay tower. And she wanted to do this for free, which, of course, their parents charge crap ton of money. And so they weren't going to allow her to do that.
It's a financial opportunity for them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they were just, they might as well just be throwing money out the window by allowing her to do this. But she was persistent in trying to get the mom, actually. I think she was trying to connect with Lyra more than Rank, the father. She was kind of going to Lyra and saying, please let me use the communications tower. She's very secretive about what she was trying to do. But any thoughts around, I guess, kind of where this has gone so far and what it's set up?
Well, something to add about her too is I liked how it's described that she has like a very commanding presence about her. Like, just aside from the kind of hints that she's a witch, like when she's asking the dad about the hyperdrive, she just like stares him down when he makes excuses, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm working on it," and kind of like she's the only person that I feel like I don't know, the only person that can actually get him to do what he needs to do. I mean, as sad as that is.
Yeah.
But
there was something
I
like
also,
piercing about her presence for him, like unnerving about his presence.
yeah, and it sounds like she probably has that effect on a lot of people, but maybe because Bug kind of has like an immediate respect for her, maybe she's not as intimidated by her as some of the other people are. But I also really appreciated that she brought her cat with her. That's a good pet owner thing to do.
Right. Travel with your pets. Don't leave them
Yeah,
behind.
don't leave your pet on Dathomir
Especially
while it's being destroyed.
when it's up in flames.
Yeah.
So, and so of course she's very interested now, right? She's interested in Dathomir. I think I don't remember if she specifically learns that this woman is from Dathomir. I think she does, but now she's got two connections, right? She's got the message that she heard, earlier on. Now this woman's in town, or at the town at the inn, and so she's very curious. And there's one point where this woman in black leaves the room, and she goes on these walks, at night or something. And one night when she goes on one of the walks, Bug sneaks into her room. And when she goes into the room, she noticed that there's this kind of a clay bowl that's kind of overturned. And when she lifts
And
up
the room is spotless otherwise.
yeah, no, good point. Right. The room is spotless compared to everybody else's rooms. Like there's something again weird about this. So, but yeah, she looks under the bowl and there's like this clay figurine, and it's actually the Monarch piece, like that little missing piece from the Dejarg board.
But an even better version of it.
Yeah, it's like, right, you're right. It's not even like the pieces that are there now are all kind of rough and not very nice. This one's like elegantly crafted, right? Coincidental, probably, but more on that here in just a little bit. And so she's like really ecstatic that she's found this like really beautiful piece that she's been missing from this board. And so she takes it and pockets it. She kind of steals it, but she's rationalizing this as like, okay, I'm just going to borrow this, right? I'm going to go have fun with it. What, typical 9-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid,
yeah.
rationalizing theft. But she's, thinking about it. And then suddenly the door opens up to the room. And when she turns around to look to see who came in, there's nobody there. And so you kind of have this like eerie, spooky kind of effect going on. And so she goes out to the hallway. She's looking around. There's nobody there. And she kind of writes it off as like, oh, okay, well, there's probably people just, I think kids or, pranking or whatever else. But
the AC came on.
The AC came on, right? Something. She's not really sure what happens. But she ends up heading out, and she goes over to the common area. Now, at this point, it's like after, I imagine it's probably, 9, 10 p.m.-ish. It's in the evening. Most of the people have gone back to the rooms at the inn. And so it's her time now to kind of play on the Dejarg board. She gets her little piece out and she starts playing with it. And it's at this point that Iker, the cat, suddenly jumps on the board out of nowhere, right? Scares her. The pieces go flying everywhere. She picks up the Monarch piece that falls into the fire, I think, or near the fire. She picks that up. And, looking at the cat, she's kind of backing away from the cat when suddenly she backs up into the woman in black. And the woman in black, of course, I would imagine, doesn't really say, but I think she's been watching her this entire time and probably she knows that she's taken this piece here. But she actually just says, hey, thank you for cleaning my room. You did a great job. And then she pulls out the little clay bowl. So let me pause here. Anything you want to add to, I guess, so what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so I think at this point, this is when Bug is starting to put together, because okay, like us as the reader, it's very clear to us as the reader pretty much immediately that this woman is some kind of a witch from Dathomir. But to Bug's perspective, Bug has probably never seen anyone from Dathomir before, so Bug is probably kind of very slowly piecing this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, the moment when Bug drops the piece and she immediately picks the piece up, and I think part of it got burnt by like the embers of the fire.
Yeah, right.
She picks it up and it's like, it looks like a flash of her own face for a second. Did you catch that?
Oh, yes,
and then
that's right.
And then to me, that's when I was like, okay, I think this is probably confirmation for Bug that this woman does have some sort of magical ability. It's not explicitly stated like that in the text, but it seems like, she goes into the room. The room is weird. There's the piece that's the exact piece that she wanted, but even better. And then the piece kind of like changes form at one point. I feel like this is when Bug is starting to put together like, okay, this person has supernatural abilities of some kind. And maybe this is kind of what opens her up to being more intrigued with this woman as the story's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, she's definitely captivated by her for all the reasons that we've already talked about. But and this is going to be, this plays into a lot of the story at the very end here. Okay, so at this point, the woman in black, she pulls out that clay gray bowl that was in her room. And she's kind of got a vial of liquid that she pulls out as well. She pours the liquid in the bowl, and suddenly there's like magic happening, right? It talks about how the liquid goes from blue, then it turns to green, it eventually turns to red. and then starts making kind of like this swirling mist around it, right? Something going. And at this point, I mean, if I'm Bug, I'm like, okay, this is a witch. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah,
else you would
now it's
explain
for
this.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then outside of the bowl, along the outside of the bowl, there are these green markings. These markings that light up in green, and so kind of think about it as like I would imagine like witch markings of some sort, like glyphs,
Like
if you will.
runes or something.
Yeah, runes or glyphs, and they're all lit up in green. So something very magical about this. And this is where the story then kind of shifts into the flashback, if you will, right? And so this is the story of two characters by the name of Falta and Yenna. And the woman in black starts off, it's really funny. She starts off with like, do you like stories? Like it's story time kind of thing. And she mentions that this story doesn't start with, once upon a time. And instead it starts with not so very long ago, nor so very far away, which is the inverse of from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, which I thought was kind of cute for her to
Yeah.
do. But we're introduced to a character by the name of Falta. So maybe why don't you kind of give us the physical appearances and what we learn initially about Falta before she gets into her magic, the new magic that she's making.
Yeah, so she's a witch on Dathomir. She's technically not a Night Sister, but she does live in close proximity to them and she works with them a lot. And what her skill is it has a lot to do with the home. So like she makes utensils, she makes household items, and she imbues them with magic to make them better for the user in some way. Like there's one line that says like it was said that even water tasted better out of one of her cups and things like that. And so she develops a reputation on Dathomir for being this really, really excellent magical craftswoman. And she's actually quite powerful in what she does. And her skill grows with time. She gets better and better at this. And this is kind of how she forms a relationship with the Night Sisters, is because they come to her and purchase a lot of the things that she creates.
Yeah, she was kind of trading back and forth. And, I think at some point she gets the nickname of the Hearth Dweller
Yes.
because of her craft as well. And she, again, relative to where the Night Sisters are, she, I guess, outside of where we see in the Massacre episode where the Dathomirian witches are, there's kind of like a marsh, like a swampland that's pretty much surrounding it. And she kind of lives just on the outskirts of that. So there's a pretty good amount of distance between where she's at and where the Night Sisters are, but she's still in relatively close that she's able to kind of do the trading and all that. I guess one of the other significant things about her is she doesn't have the same mindset as the Night Sisters, where the Night Sisters were all about like war and death. Falta was into more of creativity, creation, and living. Like there was almost something like it was kind of like the black witches versus the black magic witches versus white magic witches kind of thing going on here. Did you kind of pick up on that as well?
Yeah, and I also think that that's probably part of the reason why when the story starts off, the woman telling the story is like, Falta was not a Night Sister, like really like kind of drawing a line. And that could be part of the reason why, is just because they kind of had fundamentally different outlooks on what they wanted to use their magical abilities for.
Yeah. 1UP versus CPU has your back. Kia Dimoni does magic to enjoy the taste of
That
ice.
is very true. Yeah.
That's a deep cut if you've read The Living Force. Good one. Okay, so going on with this story of Falta. So again, this is in the past, and this is this character Falta, we'll call her the Good Witch. Falta she's inspired, right? So all around, like we talked about earlier, all through the Dathomirian area here, the Dathomirian witches area, Mother Talzin's area, they've got these pods, right, where they've buried their dead, and their rancor skins or hides that are used. And the idea here is that, the witches, when they die, are on their way to, I can't remember, wherever they're going, and they honor them by adorning the outside of these hides with different things like herbs, mostly to kill the smell because there are dead corpses in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's this like really grotesque, gruesome looking scene, but not to a Dathomirian. So anyway, she's inspired by
It's
this.
like a sacred burial to them.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, this plays into old Daka's hands later when she has to bring them all back from the dead
It's
during
like,
that
thank
war.
God we saved all those
I
corpses.
know, it's like, I didn't think we were going to need these rations, but here we are.
But I'm so glad we held on to these.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about doomsday prepping.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she's kind of, she sees that and she's like, okay, I want to do something like that, but I want to do something different. I don't want to do that. That's, really morbid. And so she then starts to kind of make her own pods. And she starts with this clay. I think it's like gray clay from the Singing Mountains. And then she gets shells from the Blue Coral Divers clan, which is another clan of witches, I assume, that's around there. She gets berries from the Red Hills, like these red berries from the Red Hills. And she puts all this and takes some fronds from the Misty Falls instead of rancor hides. And she puts all this together and she kind of makes her own little pod, right? And she goes out there and she's singing to this and she like sings lullabies to this at night. And she's almost kind of like, nurturing this pod in a lot of ways. And over the course of many months, the pod starts to change different colors. So it goes from green to purple, turns to rose, and then it finally ends, right? I'm assuming like just call it 9 months at this point. It then goes into kind of like this pulsating crimson color. And eventually there is a child that's born out of here. So she's almost created life in the sense, right? Which you think about from Star Wars, I mean, that is kind of like the holy grail for so many people, right? Is how do you create life and how do you preserve life? And here she is doing it right in front of Mother Talzin, which is going to we're going to find out a little bit more about later. But the child that comes out, and this is where I felt like this is where I want to, at some point, I do want to tie this into the Ahsoka series, because I have a theory as to why this is all being done here. But more on that in just a second. So the child that comes out is got brown skin like the clay. She's got the red lips from the berries. She's got blue eyes, which I thought was significant because we don't really see a lot of Dathomirian witches, or even in the Tales of the Empire, we didn't see a lot of them with blue colored eyes. And then she's got like these fern tattoos around her temples, and that comes from the ferns that were used when she was kind of gathering all those supplies. Of course, she's got now basically her own daughter, and she names this daughter Yenna. So, anything you want to add? Any thoughts around Yenna or that whole process, or the way the way she kind of created life in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, like the contrast between she's surrounded by all these gross, stinking pods that, while sacred, do have rotting bodies in them, and
Sure.
then she makes like a really nice, fun pod and is able to make it work. I mean, I think that's really cool. So
Yeah.
I love the idea of her kind of, and that's just, it speaks again to the type of magic user that she was, which is she sees something that somebody else does and it's like, okay, this is a cool concept, but what can I do with this? How can I make it better? How can I use it for something more beneficial rather than like a destructive way? And then
Mhm.
that's what comes out of it. So I really like how that progression takes place.
Yeah, and we don't see, like, we usually associate the green mists with the Dathomirian witches. And, with Tales of the Empire, we saw the mountain witches and they kind of had this white light about them. It's never we don't ever get a kind of a descriptor here as far as like what the magic looks like itself. Not that it's important, but I because they don't really focus in on the green mists at all. I do kind of get the sense that they are maybe manipulating the force in similar ways, but there's something about the way the witches are doing it that's creating this green effect, which is different than the way the mountain witches was just creating this white effect. But it's very intriguing. It's fascinating to kind of try to wrap your head around how they can manipulate the force the way they do through magic, and have these kind of different outcomes. It's almost kind of like you said, like a light side, dark side. There's almost kind of different variations similar to the Jedi and the Force here now with just Force magic and as well.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of what I was thinking too, especially after seeing how the mountain witches were and just how their whole outlook is different than the Night Sisters. And to
Hmm.
me, that the different outlook is in it, kind of like in this particular story too. To me, the different outlook is an indicator of what they're kind of drawing from for their magic. And so to me, that's what makes me think that that's the reasons for the different colors. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll get that confirmed at some point. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that would be cool if we did. So we break away from the story time. So we go back to the woman in black, and at this point, she kind of picks up that little figurine again, and she puts it in her hands, kind of cups it in her hands, and she blows on it, and suddenly it like magically transforms into Yenna, like the character that she's talking about in the story, and Yenna is like sleeping at this point, and so again, she's actually looking at this figurine, and really, it says she's longing for this character named Yenna. And so at this point, as a reader, I think this is where I was like, oh, wait a second. Okay, this is probably, her story. She probably is Falta, the main character of the story that she's telling Bug, right? And this gets confirmed a little bit later. But then she makes one other comment before she goes back to, or she makes one comment, and she says that, talking about the creation of Yenna, she says, to create beauty for beauty's sake, love, not love of wealth or power, but of another being, was what was natural for Falta, was unthinkable to Townsend. So again, setting herself apart of how Townsend is really about death and destruction, and Falta is about love and life, right? So good versus evil, kind of good and bad kind of thing. So while she's kind of doing this, and we're still not back into the story time here, but around the room, the mists are kind of starting to really pick up. They're starting to kind of go spread out further into the commons area where Bug is at. Bug is starting to smell like the swamp itself, and even though they're nowhere near the swamp, of course, but there's something about what's happening in the room that's almost like she's experiencing this story, like her senses are heightened because of it. The odor is super heavy. Her eyes are starting to get kind of misty and cloudy. It's kind of like the atmosphere of where the swamp is, and you kind of get the sense, and maybe not from her perspective yet, but you as a reader get the sense that there's something more going on here in the room that you're not really sure just yet. But
Yeah, it's definitely like she's being transported in all of her senses are being affected by this too. Even though she was already pretty emotionally invested in the story, her senses are now being affected too. And something too that really stood out to me is when we see this image of Yenna and Falta's looking at it and missing Yenna. It's the contrast between the life that Bug has had and the life that Yenna has had is
mm,
really, I mean, it's really a strong contrast
yeah,
because Yenna was, I mean, born deliberately, very loved, cherished, really wanted. And Bug, that does not seem like the case at all. So I can't help but wonder if maybe that aspect is partially why Bug is so invested in this story, even though she doesn't know these people.
yeah. No, that's a great point. I hadn't considered that. You've got a very the dichotomy between the two lives is very, very different. And you're right. It's almost kind of like an immersive experience at this point, right? She's almost kind of feeling and smelling, and she's so enthralled in the story on a personal level as well that she says, "I want to know," or like, what happens at this point, right? Kind of thing. And so the woman continues on. So the woman that we think is Falta, to be confirmed here in just a few minutes, but Falta continues with the story. And so we fast forward now. We're still in the past, but a number of years have passed. And so now you have Falta and Yenna. I think she's about, 12 years old here at this point. And we learn that eventually Mother Talzin gets wind that Falta was able to create life. And so she calls Falta over to the fortress and tells her to bring her, quote, finest wares. Well, Falta's no dummy. She knows exactly what Talzin wants. And so she brings all her finest wares, which are the bowls and the cups and all the really cool fancy magic houseware stuff, pampered chef stuff or whatever. And she goes there and Talzin's like, hey, this stuff is great. Love you, but you know exactly what you were supposed to bring and you didn't bring her. I'm going to ask you to bring her again. And if you don't, then I'm going to go and grab her from you, right? She almost threatens that she's going to go after her and bring her to her herself. So Falta goes back and grabs Yenna. They head back over to the fortress. And Falta talks to Mother Talzin for the first time. I think some time has passed at this point. I think she's like 13 years old now. So about a year has passed before she goes back over there. Talzin tells Falta that she wants her to come live with the Night Sisters. Blatantly, no shame about it. Just says, hey, you need to come live with us.
And
she
she
says that
says
she
it
can.
in a manipulative way.
Oh, really? I've got the quote here. I'll read it in just a second. But yeah, I mean, she tells her that she's the one that can help draw her power. And let me back up. During that time period, there's she's starting to learn her magic, and she realizes, I think that both Talzin and Falta realize that there's something special about Yenna, right? And Talzin tells her that she can help draw her powers out of her. Falta says, no, you're not taking my daughter. You're not going to train her. And so she kind of puts this bug, no pun intended, in Yenna's ear and says, when you grow tired of your small life, come to me and we will make it larger than your mother dreams for you. And it's like, oh, you bitch, you know what?
That sounds like the dark side to me.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's Mother Talzin. I mean, she's kind of a jerk face anyways.
Yeah, I just mean back to that contrast between the types of witches. I mean,
Yes.
there it is
Yeah.
right there.
And, as a 13-year-old girl, of course, Falta loves her, right? But she acknowledges and recognizes that Mother Talzin is an extremely superior power. And to have like the mother of the Night Sisters, the famed, glorious Night Sisters, tell her that she wants her to come back to her so that she can train her. I mean, there's a part in there where I think it says Yenna felt like kind of great. She felt appreciated, and she liked that she was being acknowledged by somebody like Mother Talzin. So all of this plays into it a little bit later, but she's very impressed. Like Mother Talzin leaves the exact impression on Yenna that she wants to do with all that.
Well, and the thing that's funny though is that technically Falta, her mother, is the more powerful one because she was able
I
to
would agree.
create life
I would agree.
and Mother Talzin wasn't. But I think Mother Talzin just has this like presence.
Well, it's the presence, it's the army, it's the power, and then you've got Falta, who, hey, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with +5 cups of water, but it's not
Falta's
that.
just chilling. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's what Talzin's doing. I mean, she's taking
Yeah.
a low blow shot at her, saying like, you're living out in the swamps and you're learning, you're going to learn how to make glasses, and I can, take you to higher things if you come over here, right? You've seen what we do. We're big, glorious, that kind of stuff. So I think
Yeah.
she's really undermining what her mom is giving to her. And of course, as an impressionable 13-year-old child, yeah, I mean, it's going to have an impact on her, which we'll see here in just a second.
And Mother Talzin just has that. It's like you're saying, she has the stuff, all the fancy stuff to back it up, but then she also just seems powerful. And the way that I'm picturing Falta is I'm picturing a much more humble person
Yes.
who's just kind of living out in her cabin, is content with things how they are, which that sounds like a way better choice. But to a 13-year-old, you're going to be tempted by the fancy, glorious stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar to like, where was Kenobi at? You know what I mean? He was out living on Tatooine for all the right reasons. We know why, but I mean, he was living a very humble life. I mean, he didn't have a lot, didn't have a job. He was just kind of out there living in the hottest place on earth. And then you got somebody like Vader, right? And he's got all the power, and he's flying around in ships, and he's doing all kinds of stuff, right? So it's that same kind of dichotomy where we're looking at it and you go, which one do I want to be with? Is one more powerful than the other? Maybe, maybe not, but I could leave the life that I'm in now and be, go live a better life, or a presumably better life, if I do join her. And again, as a 13-year-old, this stuff is impressionable, right? It leaves a mark, gives them something to think about. Okay, so we get away from the story, and this is where we get more of kind of what's going on in the room now with the woman in black / Falta and Bug. And Bug is starting to feel feverish. Her heart is like racing really fast. She's starting to feel like she's in a dream. Her body feels heavy. She feels almost kind of too heavy to move. And she's almost talking like she's in a trance. Like there's something, like she's being hypnotized at this point. You're, as a reader, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And but she tells Yenna, I want to know what's happening. She wants to know, Bug tells Falta she wants to know more about the story. Tell me more about what's happening with Yenna. But she's almost kind of like a zombie talking now. Not really, lucid, but she definitely is aware of the story and wants to hear more. So we get into the war now on Dathomir. So Falta finds a note, or we're going to get into this section of where we get into the war on Dathomir. So Falta finds a note at some point. I think at this point, Yenna was kind of getting frustrated because she wasn't able to do the magic the way Falta did. So every time she would create like a bowl or cup, there was always something wrong with it. I think one point she said like the water that was poured into the bowl would like evaporate, right? And so she was very inconsistent for her, and she was getting very, very frustrated about not being able to learn the magic that Falta was teaching her. And so she would go on these walks just to kind of let off steam. And Falta, as a mom, was like, I need to give her space. She's very frustrated and very, agitated by all of this. And eventually, one day, she leaves and never comes back. And Falta finds a note that Yenna left for her, and it says, "Mother, I've gone to learn from the Night Sisters. Maybe I will find my talent with them and find my way in the larger world." Almost some of the exact words that Mother Talzin used, right, to kind of throw in her face. And of course, this is Falta's worst nightmare, that her daughter has now left and basically ran away from home. There's about a year that passes at this point, and she doesn't go after her. She lets a couple seasons go by. We get into the actual massacre, and this is where Falta sees the separatist ships come in. And of course, she's completely scared, freaked out for her daughter, because she knows that the separatist ships are likely there for, they're kind of ascending right in Talzin's area. And so she decides that she's going to go to the fortress and try to find her daughter and save her daughter before, she's a victim of war, Mother Talzin's war. The entire time she's blaming Talzin. She's really angry with the fact that, this is, she's brought war to the planet here and, endangering the life of her daughter. And as she gets closer to the fortress, this is where the pods are released. So this is where old Daka, in the Clone Wars episode, where she starts casting, where Mother Talzin walks in and tells old Daka, we need to raise the undead army. And so Daka starts doing this kind of chanting thing, and this like green mist kind of comes out, and it starts going to all the pods. And as it hits each pod, these undead zombies start popping out. Well, one of these zombies pops out and like lands right on this little raft that she's using to like paddle her way to the fortress.
It's horrible.
And it freaks her out, right? Even it says that she's not, she's
can't
not
imagine
really
why.
Well, yeah, if you've seen that, by the way, that episode is so good. Like, it is one of the best, in my opinion. It's one of the best, well put together episodes of the Clone Wars. It's definitely a highlight, but it is scary. Like, it's on the cusp of like being not probably age appropriate for some children, even though the Clone Wars in general is supposed to be for kids.
Yeah, depending on the age. I don't know about that.
Yeah, but it's a great episode. Nonetheless, the zombie, just like the episode, it wakes up, it stands up, and then it takes off at like extreme high speed and heads over to the fortress, and it goes to fight the battle. By the time that Falta gets there to the fortress, the battle's pretty much over. This is and to kind of bring you up to date on what happened in the battle. Dooku is being possessed by Mother Talzin. Like, she's in his body at one point and like is about to just kill him. And this is where he contacts Grievous just before he's like about to die and tells Grievous, follow the green mist, go kill Mother Talzin, find her because she's got the spell on me or whatever. And so Grievous takes a bunch of droids. They storm the fortress. They kill Daka, which suddenly kills all of the zombies she's kind of like the control ship or whatever. Daka dies, the zombies die, and then they finally make their way into Talzin. And when they all shoot on Talzin, she turns into like a mist. And so at that point, the war is over. This is, again, kind of the recap. What I said at the beginning, everybody kind of goes and leaves, and Grievous is victorious. Well, she gets there, and the first person that she comes across is Daka. And Daka is not dead. So Daka actually took a lightsaber to her chest or stomach, I think, from General Grievous in the episode. But she sees the body there, and she kind of walks up to it, and she's startled because Daka kind of does one of these jump scares, grabs her by the arm, and tells her that that Mother Talzin has sent Yenna away, and she actually calls her Talzin's prize, which I thought was kind of like a big slap in the face. That this is what they were calling Yenna, Talzin's prize.
Yeah.
But and then Falta asks, did she send her to the Singing Mountain? Was it the Howling Crag? And then her last words before she dies are, no. Daka tells her that no, she sent her off world, like she's not even on this planet. So I know it's a lot. Let me pause there. I guess anything you want to add into what's happened here with the war and what she finds.
Well, the phrase Talzin's prize does make me wonder. Well, not even wonder. Does make me pretty sure that Mother Talzin was when she planted that seed, when she said that manipulative stuff to Yenna, I almost feel like maybe that wasn't the only time that an attempt was made to try to convince her. Cause like Towson's prize, that sounds like this was like a really long event that happened over the course of years until Yenna was finally convinced. Like, I almost wonder if Mother Talzin had some other conversation with her that's just not on the page, because it sounds like it was a long-term goal of hers for them to be
Maybe.
calling her this.
Yeah, or the fact that in that year that transpired with her working under Townsend, they saw something significant about her and that she stood out. She was unique, kind of like a chosen one. Kind of her midichlorian count was high, whatever. Something similar in that vein, from a like force magic kind of perspective. And so that might be why they gave her that little nickname of Townsend's prize. She was a prize, and people wanted her or needed her for some reason. We don't know specifically, and we don't ever find out, honestly, in this episode what she's capable of. So this is now okay. So at this point, we're getting towards the end of the story, and this was kind of the creepy part for me. Like, it was kind of eerie the way this was being talked about. This Falta is telling the story, and she's just finished talking about how Daka told Falta that Yenna had went off world. And then she continues that story by saying, and so she began to climb. And you as a reader are like, what is going on? Like, how does and so she began to climb connect with the child went off world?
Yeah.
And then so Bug, when she hears this, she can't open her eyes at this point. She's really thirsty. Her legs are aching for some reason. She's not really sure why. And then Falta continues with the story. She says she climbed to the top of the stairs in the tower and opened the door with the code that she had gotten from one of her night sisters. And then you're like, wait, what? It's like, I read this like 4 times trying to understand like what is going on.
Yeah.
And what you realize is that the woman in black, Falta, is trying to persuade, she's almost hypnotized Bug at this point. And this entire story, although it is a great story, and I think, it's coming from a good place, which we'll find out a little bit later, it was a way to manipulate Bug to get her to the relay tower so that she could get in there and use that and listen to messages or talk or whatever it is.
Well, she does. I mean, she starts doing the same thing that she is talking bad about Mother Talzin for doing. I mean, yeah, the reasons for doing it are different,
Yep.
which is significant. She's not doing it for selfish reasons, in my opinion, but the fact that she's doing it this way, I mean, she's becoming what she hates.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not even when it clicks for Bug is when she says that the Night Sisters gave her the code, and then Bug's like, that doesn't make sense, because, and she doesn't say this, but she says, but all the Night Sisters were dead. And then the last line from the woman in black is, a kindly one gave her the code and she opened the door with it. Yes, that's it. Open it. And she yells at Bug like, open
That
it.
scared that kind of creeped me out.
I want to hear the audio. They did an audiobook for this one. I've never listened to it, but I just want to see if they really kind of play into the spookiness of this scene, because it is kind of creepy the way she kind of yells at her. It's almost kind of like Bilbo putting on the ring or trying to take the ring from him, and suddenly he just like lashes out.
Yes.
And there's like sense of evil that kind of comes out. But it's the same kind of thing where she yells at Bug, like, open it. And Bug hears this and she thinks, oh my God, I'm going to get hit. Because anytime an adult speaks to this way, to me this way, there's some kind of physical abuse that shortly follows. And of course that doesn't happen. She forces her eyes open, and that's when she realizes that they're not even in the common room anymore, that somehow they've made their way up to the tower. And she like lays into this woman, and she's like, all you had to do was ask. You did exactly what Townsend in this story was doing, manipulating people for what they want. And you just had to ask me, which is a very grown up kind of thing to kind of do and say. And she also at this point calls her out, like, I know you're Falta. Like, I know you're the main woman in the story kind of thing. And, and Bug is like feeling for her. She's feeling for this mother who's lost her daughter and is looking for her daughter. And she's just really kind of shaming her for going about manipulating Bug in the way that she did.
I love it when Bug confronts Falta and is like you said, all you had to do is ask, because it's true. Like, Bug isn't like her parents. If Falta had just said, "Hey, I'm trying to find my daughter. Can you please sneak me up?" Like, Bug would have done it, but Falta just assumes that Bug is probably like her parents and isn't
Right.
going to let her up there. So she sees her as a weaker person and is like, "Oh, I can manipulate her," and does this whole drama that she didn't even have to do because Bug would have just let her up there. So that was just really sad that she was doing Bug that way for no reason.
Yeah, and you realize as a reader, and I guess to some extent, Bug is realizes as well, is the whole monarch piece and the creation of that, the door being open, it all kind of starts to make sense that this is all part of a long game that she was playing with Bug, manipulating Bug to get her to open up the relay tower after Rank had told her no, that he wasn't going to, or I guess Lyra basically said that they weren't going to. And so she goes ahead and she's again really upset with her, but she's like, I'm going to do it. So she puts in the code and she lets Falta go in. Falta goes into the comm tower and she plays back the message that Bug heard about somebody being sent off to the mid rim during the Battle of Dathomir. And she plays it again. I think she listens to the message twice. And she comes out and suddenly she's like, her whole demeanor has changed. Falta's demeanor has changed. She's kind of back to the good witch that we know from the background story. And she goes up to Bug and she's like hopeful now. She's hopeful knowing that her daughter is alive. She wasn't on Dathomir, that she's now she's at least in the mid rim. So that narrows it down. She didn't have to look in the outer rim or in the core systems. She can just go to the mid rim. It's, less territory to kind of search for. And she goes and gives Bug a hug, like a bug hug. And Bug is like not hugged often, right? And she's never like really been hugged, but she kind of leans into the hug as well. And she's very thankful that Bug has helped her. And I think while they're hugging as well, there's that, I don't know if you caught this, but it says that Iker, the cat, comes and like wraps itself around Bug's legs too and is kind of hugging her as well. So like she's getting a hug from a cat and the witch at the same time, which I thought was kind of sweet, of course.
So I guess they made up in the end.
They did. But that's not it, because this is where the story gets. Well, I think that's probably the whole manipulation piece and the reveal I thought was really great. But this is kind of what I would call the epilogue of sorts. But Falta, she kind of apologizes for what she did, but not really. She never said I'm sorry, which is a big thing for me.
I guess the hug was an implied I'm
yeah,
sorry.
And she hugged it out. They hugged it out at least.
Yeah.
But she's acknowledging that she went about this the wrong way. She says, "You're right, of course. I've been looking for so long already. And when you want something so badly, you forget that other people want things and need things too." She says, "What do you want, Bug?" And Bug responds, she wants 3 things. She wants the monarch piece, which is kind of it seems trivial, but she wants to keep that little piece, that little figurine. And Falta tells her, "You can have it, but you need to learn the magic trick that goes with it, and you can turn that into anything you want." Like there's something really magical about that. By the way, when you watch the massacre episode, there's a moment in there. I think I mentioned that Mother Talzin is possessing Dooku. She summons like this clay figurine that comes out of like a pool or I don't know, a witch's brew kind of thing. And it looks like a clay figurine. I thought, I wonder if that was something that if she got that clay from Falta, like they could work that in pretty easily, right? But it looks very similar in my opinion. It looks like it's a clay figurine, and who would provide Mother Talzin with clay? Well, yeah. It's gonna have to be Falta, right? So anyway.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Or at the very least, she could have learned the trick from Falta, maybe.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, so that's the first thing that Bug wants. She wants a little monarch piece, and of course she's like, "Yeah, you can have it." Then she tells her that she wants to learn the magic from Falta. So she wants to become a witch, essentially. Even though she's not born on Dathomir, doesn't look like the Dathomirians. And the last thing is she wants to travel around the galaxy with Falta looking for Yenna. And so essentially now she's got a companion, she's got a daughter, right? And we don't get more of this story, but there's a lot of stuff that happens in my head. And it finally ends with Falta telling Bug, "Hey, if you really want, I can tell you what your real name is. Like right now, right here, I can find out what it is." And Bug says, "Thank you, but I don't think so. I think maybe." And then she kind of looks up into the sky. She kind of opens up her arms, looking at the sky, looking at the stars, and says, "Maybe somewhere out there, I'll find my own." And that's how the book ends. It ends with her Bug joins Falta, and they are going to go look for Yenna somewhere in the mid rim, and she's going to make up her own name. And so I guess all of that. That's how the story ends. If we tie this to Morgan Elsbeth, then at some point she takes on the name Morgan Elsbeth. But I guess your kind of thoughts around the way this thing ended, the big reveal, what she wanted, anything I missed in that before we get into speculation about Morgan Elsbeth and how this ties, or whether or not it ties into Tales of the Empire.
Well, I guess the apology must have been sincere enough for Bug because right after they get mad at each other, Bug is like, "Will you take me with you and teach me everything?" So
Right.
I guess the apology did end up making the cut, but um yeah, I mean it's cool that this ended up giving her an opportunity to kind of make a better life for herself at the very least cuz the life that she was in was definitely worse.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible life, so it probably wasn't that hard of a decision. I think at one point, one of the loose ends that they talk about was what to do about Rank and Lyra, her parents. And Falta tells her that, I can cast a spell on them. And it'll be like a week before they realize you're even gone. We'll be long gone at that point. And she's okay with it. Like, she's ready to ditch these abusive parents and go live this life for herself. On the other hand, too, like, there is something opportunistic about Morgan Elsbeth, and we see that in full force when we get to Tales of the Empire, right? Why does she side with the Empire? We speculated, by the way, not to say we told you so, but when we were talking about why Morgan Elsbeth was with Thrawn during the Ahsoka series, we had speculated that it was likely purely opportunistic, a means to an end, and that end being revenge for what happened on Dathomir, and I think that was confirmed now in Tales of the Empire. But so you could almost see it as this was the roots of that too, right? It was there was an opportunity here for her to get away from that, and yeah, maybe this was jumping into the unknown and somebody who just manipulated her, but they weren't beating her, and she was going to have an opportunity to become more powerful and whatever else. There was again just a big opportunity here, so why pass it up? And she could have been inspired too. She could be inspired by Yenna's story of going to Talzin and following the power, and she's looking at Falta as being the power. Being a way to get off the rock kind of thing. So for all those reasons and probably many more, this was kind of a no-brainer for her to go ahead and leave.
Well, and also it's cool too because like you mentioned about Yenna's story, you also have these two stories are almost kind of like mirror images of each other. Like you have Bug who is in a horrible situation, unwanted, and then the opposite of that is Yenna who was very wanted, but they both choose to leave their homes for different reasons at around the same age.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I mean, you have Bug who her home situation was horrible. Yenna's was good for the most part. She was just frustrated with homeschool. And then they both leave home to go live with another witch. So I don't know, it's just kind of
Yeah.
interesting, like the way that these two stories kind of like run alongside each other and have certain things in common and then certain things that are opposites.
Yeah. No, that's a good call out. They're very, very similar. They do mirror each other in a lot of ways. I guess the $1 million question, let's go ahead and start talking about it is this story about Morgan Elsbeth? And I think prior to Tales of the Empire, I was 100% on board with it being the origin story for Bug. Where Tales of the Empire kind of throws a wrench in things is that we see Morgan Elsbeth in presumably the battle that's going on Dathomir, and already as Morgan Elsbeth. She's not Yenna, right? They call her Morgan. We get to see Morgan Elsbeth's mom, who I think her name is Selena. I don't know if they say her name, but I know in the credits it's listed as Selena. So it's kind of hard to say this is really her now, because we get to see her around in the Battle of Dathomir, which, by the outcome of that in the short story was she is a survivor and she's found and unconscious, and then makes her way up to the Mountain Clan witches, right, and spends time with them there, even though the Empire or the Separatists come there and invade their area. Whereas in this story, if that was Morgan, if Yenna is, if Morgan Elsbeth is Bug, she was nowhere around that. She was living over at an inn at the time.
Yeah.
So
On
the
a
way
different planet.
a totally different planet, right? So you got the way to get there now is like, okay, so maybe they go back there and there's another war. I mean, it just doesn't make sense,
Yeah,
right?
that's
But
what I
here's
was doing.
it's hard. It really is difficult. But here's the thing that really makes it even more complicated. And I think I have a really simple answer to this as well. But even more complicated is Inasanto. the actress who plays Morgan Elsbeth in the live action series, right? She did an interview with Cinemaga. I think it was about a week ago, about 10 days ago. And they were asking her, maybe we can put it in, I'll put it in the show notes if you guys want to click on the link and take a look at it. It's a really great interview. Very short, but anyways, the reporter asked her, how did you prepare for this kind of character? And of course she said, I went back and watched, the Clone Wars. Of course, I spent a lot of time with Dave Filoni. I read the story Bug by Anne Conway's, Dave Filoni's wife. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Why would she read this story? Now, you could just say, well, it's because this takes place around the same time and it takes place in the midst of that massacre episode. But this is not required reading. There's nothing in here that tells me, in order to get in the head of Morgan Elsbeth or even in the head of Witches of Dathomir, you need to read this story. You get that and so much more just watching Massacre. So maybe she's a very thorough kind of person, but a lot of people heard that and took to Twitter and took to social media and were like, okay, she's just confirmed that this character that we've speculated over the last 4 years now as being Morgan Elsbeth is indeed Bug. But again, the timelines don't really make sense these days as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that if she likes to get her world building info by reading, then this is probably a good story for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I really do feel like she read this because one of these characters is supposed to be Morgan Elsbeth. And this is what I was doing.
You texted me about this.
I did. I texted you because I was trying to make it make sense and it wasn't working. So I was not willing to accept the fact that they changed the books again with the TV show. And I was like, this could still work. And so I started trying to imagine what if Yenna was Morgan Elsbeth. And it wasn't really working either.
Yeah.
Because, with the way that Bug is on this other planet while that battle's happening, and then in Tales of the Empire, we see that Morgan Elsbeth is on Dathomir. So it just wasn't lining up. So, I mean, the conclusion that I came to is just that they ended up changing the events and the background. But that does kind of raise an interesting question because it kind of changes Morgan Elsbeth as a character to me, because in Bug, she's completely alone. She has nobody. And that's how she starts off her life, is with nobody. And then eventually she finds Falta. But compared to the Tales of the Empire version, Morgan Elsbeth seemingly grows up with the Night Sisters and has a very close-knit family that she then gets taken away from her. So to me, those are kind of two different motivators. One is you've lost everybody that you love, and then the other one is you've never really had anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're so diametrically different in that regard. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, Alex said it right. He just said, if it's the producer's wife's book, then yeah, you have to read it. So maybe, it's just required reading. That's a good point. I think and I'm with you. Like you said, what I thought would be the simplest answer is that this is just another example where they've gone back and retold the story a different way. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I don't really have the biggest problem with that, honestly, but it sucks just for somebody that sat on the theory that Bug was Morgan Elsbeth for the better part of 3.5 years, no, that's not true. For the better part of a year, after it came out, or a year and a half now when it came out. That kind of stinks because it was
you were right, and then you had it taken away.
Had it taken away.
Yeah.
But that's Star Wars. My God, if I had cried over every time they took something away from me, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I'll tell you right now.
You just got to roll with it.
You just kind of roll with it. You get used to it. Desensitized, beaten down, indoctrinated, whatever.
Beaten down.
Whatever term you want to use to talk about that. So yeah, I think that's probably the simplest answer. I mean, and there's, maybe there's some things that she worked into, like some character traits or something, that she's probably worked into Morgan Elsbeth. I haven't really put that much. I was kind of pretty much done and over after that point. I haven't really thought about it, but maybe there are character traits in there. Like we talked about the strategy effect in there. Maybe that's, she's pulling inspiration from the story, but yeah, not as not as clean as it once maybe was, and even as in that clean, that wasn't ever really clean. It was still kind of foggy because it was a lot of speculation. But nonetheless, it's a great story. I really enjoy the story. I love the way it kind of was unfolded, the way it unfolded. I don't know if Anne is like and I don't mean any shade by this, like she's not like the strongest writer in the world, at least for this short story, but the idea behind the story and the way it progressed and the way it kind of like the reveals happened, I thought that was great. Like I really loved the way the book was set up and organized. So from a storytelling perspective, much like her husband, like really good at telling this kind of getting you really invested in the story and wanting to turn the page and understand what's happening next, even though it wasn't necessarily the best well-written story. It definitely did enough to kind of get you hooked. And so I encourage anybody to pick it up, read it for yourself, absorb it, and read some of the other stories in there. Like I said, there's like 11 in total, and they piggyback on some of the bigger episodes from the Clone Wars. And so if you're a big Clone Wars person, I don't see how you don't have this book. Honestly, it's great, and these short stories are so quick. You can pick them up, read them about 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops, and learn more about the Clone Wars.
It's also kind of a good sort of a refresher, even though it's not really going back over the exact same stories. It's almost a good refresher for the Clone Wars if you're the type of person that retains more from reading than watching, which is like how I am. Then it's nice to be able to read these because it does kind of refresh you on some of the major events of the Clone Wars, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. They do touch on them, and they lean into them a lot because they're predicated on those bigger events. Like this one was predicated on the war on Dathomir in a lot of ways. So, well, cool. Hey, did you do roll call or did you take names for people that joined us on the live feed tonight?
Yes, I did. So thanks to everyone that joined us tonight. We had One Up for CPU, Noah Rogers, Sky, Trent, My Star Wars Guys, and Ash.
And Alex, who snuck in there at the very end.
And Alex. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, that's okay. Story of his life, man. He's going to text me. He'll be crying in his pillow tonight because Lauren forgot who he was.
Well, you should have said something earlier, Alex.
Yeah, it's your fault. See, again, story of his life. It's always his fault.
If you're late, you might not make it into roll call. So.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for coming out. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. Again, like, subscribe, comment down below. Let us know what you think about the story if you do read it. Let us know what you think about this episode. If you listen to it or watch it, we'd love to hear it, the feedback. And again, just to recap, tomorrow we'll be back here for Tales of the Empire, where we're going to break down the Morgan Elsbeth story. And because Sunday is Mother's Day, we'll be back on Saturday instead. Normally we record Sunday nights at 9 p.m. We'll be here Saturday at 9 p.m. We'll kick things off with the second part of Tales of the Empire, looking at the Barriss Offee story. Jonesy and I will be doing that. And then for the Patreon members at 10 p.m. Central, we'll do our Phantom Menace 25 years later. So that's the big show where we just kind of, celebrate the Phantom Menace and talk about our movie experiences that both he and I have already gone. And I know, Lauren, you got to see it too, but, kind of talking about what the movie experience was like, now versus then. And just everything that stood out, and the impact that the Phantom Menace has had on Star Wars now here 25 years later. Okay, any final thoughts?
No, I think we're good.
Okay,
I think we covered everything.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you guys here tomorrow.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.